Hi, this is Mike Goldthwait. This is going to be my informative speech. Here's my audience. And now we'll get started. My speech is going to be on campaign finance legislation in the United States. Now, the first question we have to ask ourselves is, why is campaign finance legislation important? And the answer is that money is incredibly important in politics in the United States. It's been shown in a lot of recent studies that money is important for several reasons. First, for non-incumbent candidates, it's almost impossible to get your name out there and to become competitive in political elections without a large financial backing. You have to have a lot of people willing to raise funds for you, and you have to have a lot of donors willing to give you money. So for non-incumbents, it's absolutely imperative to raise a lot of money. For incumbents, it's less so. You don't actually have to have a large financial backing because your name is already out there. So for incumbent candidates against non-incumbent candidates who don't have a lot of money, the likelihood of the non-incumbent candidates actually beating the incumbents is less than 10%. But if that non-incumbent candidate has raised a good deal of money, they set the cap at $700,000, that percentage actually increases all the way to 45%. So the incumbents still have an advantage, but it's not so insurmountable. The other situation in which financial backing is extremely important in elections is in open elections, when there is no incumbent, so it's just everybody on equal footing. And it's been shown that the amount of financial backing you can generate is incredibly determinative in winning those races. So after establishing why exactly this is so important, I'm going to move on to a brief history of the past finance regulations in the United States. So the first widespread talks of regulating campaign financing began in around the 1860s. But it took a very long time for those ideas to become mainstream and for legislation actually to get passed. The first bill that regulated campaign financing was known as the Federal Election Campaign Act, and it was passed in the early 1970s. It was passed in 1972, then later amended in 1974. So what this legislation attempted to do was restrict the amount of money that extremely wealthy individuals could donate to political campaigns. It set a hard cap of $1,000 for individuals to donate during a particular election season, and it also limited the amount of money that a PAC, or a political action committee, could donate to $5,000 during a particular campaign season. So this really did restrict the amount of influence that extremely wealthy individuals could have on U.S. politics. Now, the second major piece of legislation that changed the way campaign financing works in the United States was the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, also known as the McCain-Feingold bill, because of the sponsors, John McCain and the Democratic Senator Feingold. And the issue prior to this act was that although wealthy individuals couldn't donate enormous sums of money to particular candidates, they could still just push enormous amounts of money directly into parties. So they would just, instead of donating to a particular candidate, they would donate to the Republican Party, say, or the Democratic Party, and then those parties could give the money to particular campaigns as they saw fit. So the previous legislation took a step towards regulating finance, but it really didn't solve the problem. This piece of legislation limited the amount of money that people could donate to the parties as well, so it took another step towards regulating campaign finance. Now, the next major step in campaign finance regulation in the United States was the landmark Supreme Court case, Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. And it's around that case that most of my presentation will be based. So, first, some background information on the case. Citizens United was a conservative political group that did a lot of fundraising and advertising and negative ads about Republican opponents. The particular question that the Supreme Court case decided was whether or not the Citizens United could air a movie called Hillary Clinton the Movie during campaign season. And under the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, this would be unlawful because the production of the movie took funds from a lot of people who had donated during the election season, and thus it wouldn't have been possible to air this movie. So the Citizens United advocates sought to show that the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act violated their freedom of speech. Now, the majority opinion, and this was an extremely controversial opinion in a 5-4 split decision, was that Citizens United was essentially correct, that the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act violated the Citizens United's rights to freedom of speech. So this reasoning was based on two major steps of logic the Supreme Court really hadn't demonstrated before. The first was that spending money is a form of free speech. And this was a very new idea. We've accepted that standing on a podium and talking is free speech, or even that broadcasting things on television or printing things in a newspaper is another important form of freedom of speech. But the Supreme Court decided that spending money so that other people could communicate your ideas is also a form of protected free speech. Then the second major decision the Supreme Court made in this case is that corporations and other associations of individuals have the right to free speech. We've accepted that individuals can talk freely in the United States, but it's a new idea that associations of individuals also have that same right. Now, the dissenting opinion was offered by Justice John Paul Stevens, and he argued very differently from the majority opinion. He said that it's far more important to protect the political process from what he called unfair corporate influence than it was to suddenly give corporations the right to free speech. So his argument was that the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act did not violate the Constitution because Citizens United and the corporations it represented don't have the right to free speech. It's already and was already legal for the individuals who are part of corporations to make donations, and John Paul Stevens argued that's enough. You don't have to give the corporations themselves, as political entities, the same rights to free speech. So after talking about the case, we move on to the impact of the court's decision. And it's had several extremely important impacts. The first is demonstrated by this graph. This is a graph of outside spending in U.S. elections. This is spending by entities that are not political parties. And you can see that in recent years, it has absolutely shot through the roof. In 2012, for instance, that's the last bar on the side, you can see that it's around 180 times what it was in 1990, which was another presidential election year. Excuse me, no it wasn't. But 1992 was, and it's still a whole lot higher. So you can see that the influence of corporations, and that's where most of this money is coming from, has grown by incredible amounts in recent years. So, on to the conclusion. What exactly is more important? Is protecting corporations' right to free speech, or protecting our political process for their unfair influence? That's still an important issue, and there's still a lot of people who are debating that. There's another campaign finance reform bill that may be on the horizon. This one, sponsored mostly by Democrats, that's hoping to essentially overturn the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United via the Federal Election Commission. And we don't really know where that's going to go, but it might take another step towards regulating campaign finance legislation if it gets passed. Thank you, and that's my speech.